The wealthy in-laws intended to humiliate him in front of everyone, but as he started to speak, everyone immediately began to cry. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into another heartwarming story that's sure to touch your heart. The sun hadn't yet reached its peak when Mariana made the final adjustments to the presentation for the social project she would showcase that day. Sitting at one of the tables in her home's grand kitchen, she carefully reviewed every detail. From a young age, Mariana had learned the importance of thorough preparation. As the daughter of a renowned businessman, she had access to the best resources, but she chose a different path. Her focus wasn't on the corporate world but on initiatives that could positively impact marginalized communities. At 26, she was already leading a non-profit organization that promoted education and training for young people in underserved areas. Despite her privileged background, Mariana made a point of personally visiting the places her projects supported. It was her way of staying connected to reality. "Ready, Mariana?" Amanda, her assistant, asked as she entered the kitchen with a folder full of documents. "Always ready, Amanda." "Let's do this," Mariana replied, gathering her papers and heading to the garage. The car that would take her to the community was a sleek, elegant sports model, yet understated. Mariana knew that in some areas, excessive luxury could cause discomfort or even problems. After a quick check, she got into the car and started the engine. As she drove through the city, the scenery began to change. Well-maintained roads and modern buildings gave way to dirt streets and modest yet lively homes. Mariana always felt a mix of apprehension and excitement upon entering these neighborhoods. It was as if every corner held a story she had yet to discover. A few miles from her destination, the car began to have issues. A strange noise came from the engine, followed by a sudden loss of power. Mariana pulled over in front of a neighborhood bakery and stepped out to assess the situation. While she excelled in many areas, car mechanics was definitely not one of them. She popped the hood and stared at the engine, completely at a loss. Passers-by glanced curiously but offered no help. Then a tall young man with a tan complexion and simple clothing approached her. "Having trouble?" he asked with a friendly smile. Mariana looked up to meet Lucas's kind brown eyes. His calm demeanor suggested someone who wasn't easily shaken by life's challenges. "I think the engine decided to quit, but to be honest, I don't really know what I'm looking at," she admitted, clearly frustrated. Lucas chuckled softly and nodded. "Mind if I take a look? I work with this sometimes. I'm not a mechanic, but I've fixed plenty of things around here." Mariana hesitated for a moment. Trusting strangers wasn't her habit, but Lucas's sincerity put her at ease. She stepped aside, allowing him access to the car. "Be my guest. If you can fix it, I'll be forever grateful." Lucas rolled up his sleeves and carefully began inspecting the engine. His movements were precise, showing practical experience. While he worked, Mariana took the opportunity to observe him more closely. There was something about the way he handled the situation, an equilibrium between determination and calm, that intrigued her. "Are you from around here?" she asked, trying to make conversation. "Yeah, I am. I work as a construction worker, but I help my dad at the shop sometimes." "And you? You don't seem like you're from around here," he replied without looking up from the engine. Mariana smiled. "I'm here because of a social project. I work with education in communities like this one." Lucas paused for a moment, looked at her, and gave a genuine smile. "That's good. A lot of people need opportunities, but not many actually care." His sincere tone made Mariana feel even more connected to the moment. It was rare to meet someone who spoke so naturally about important issues. "And you? Have you always enjoyed fixing things?" she asked curiously. Lucas shrugged. "I think it was more out of necessity than choice. When something breaks at home and you can't afford to fix it, you learn to do it yourself. Over time, you start to like it." After about 30 minutes, Lucas wiped his hands on a rag and closed the hood. "All set. It was just an issue with the fuel injection system. It was probably dirty. It shouldn't give you any more trouble today." Mariana felt relieved and impressed. "Thank you so much, Lucas. Really. How can I repay you?" He shook his head. "You don't need to. I'm just happy I could help." Mariana insisted, but Lucas refused any payment. Feeling the need to do something, she decided to invite him to visit the social project. "Look, I don't know if you'd be interested, but we're organizing professional training workshops. Someone with your skills would be more than welcome." Lucas looked surprised by the invitation but also curious. "I'll think about it. Maybe I'll stop by someday." They exchanged a smile before saying goodbye. As Mariana got back in her car and resumed her journey, she couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for Lucas. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, simple yet full of dignity and knowledge. Meanwhile, Lucas stood on the sidewalk, watching the car disappear into the horizon. To him, that woman represented something new, a bridge between two worlds that rarely connected. Without realizing it, their meeting had planted a seed that would transform both of their lives forever. The encounter between Mariana and Lucas stayed in both of their minds, a moment that seemed casual but left a profound impression. Returning to her routine of social projects, Mariana couldn't stop thinking about Lucas's simple and sincere manner. He had something that few people in her circle possessed, an authenticity that didn't rely on status or wealth. A few days later, Lucas decided to accept Mariana's invitation and showed up at the social project. Unsure of what to expect, he found her at the center of a room, surrounded by children and teenagers who listened intently to her words. She was speaking about opportunities, dreams, and how they could build a better future. Lucas stood quietly, admiring her passion. When Mariana saw him, she gave him a genuine smile. "I'm so glad you came, Lucas," she said, approaching him with enthusiasm. "Let me show you around." She guided him through the space, pointing out the improvised classrooms and the small courtyard where hands-on workshops were held. Lucas was impressed by the effort Mariana put into the work, but he also noticed the stark contrast between her world and his. He had never imagined someone wealthy could care so much about social issues. "This is amazing," Lucas said sincerely. "You can tell you really care." Mariana smiled, but before she could respond, one of the kids from the project interrupted. "Hey, who's he?" the boy asked, pointing at Lucas. "He's a friend," Mariana replied without hesitation. The word friend made Lucas blush. He had never thought someone like her would consider him that way. But as days passed, the two grew closer. Lucas began visiting the project regularly, helping with small repairs and even leading practical workshops on mechanics. Their conversations became more frequent and deeper. Mariana shared her frustrations with the privileged world she lived in, while Lucas spoke about the daily struggle to maintain dignity in a system that seemed determined to push him down. Mutual respect and admiration grew, and, without realizing it, so did something more. One afternoon, as they were putting away tools after a workshop, Lucas finally spoke up. "I know this might not make sense to you, but I feel like our friendship is something special." Mariana stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "It makes perfect sense to me, Lucas. Honestly, I don't think I've ever met anyone like you." The silence that followed was filled with a gaze that said more than words. Without planning or considering the obstacles, the two kissed right there in the empty courtyard. It was a moment of pure connection, where social class differences vanished, leaving only two people who saw the best in each other. News of the relationship quickly reached Mariana's parents. Roberto and Helena were the kind of couple who lived to maintain appearances. Roberto, a successful businessman, believed money was the solution to all problems. Helena, a well-known socialite, took pride in her connections and her family's impeccable image. To them, Mariana dating Lucas was unacceptable. "This is absurd, Helena. Our daughter involved with a construction worker?" Roberto exclaimed, reading about Lucas in a report he had ordered. "I agree. This is unacceptable. Mariana is throwing our reputation in the trash," Helena replied with the disdainful tone she always used when referring to people she deemed beneath her. They decided to confront Mariana during a family dinner. That evening, Mariana sensed something was off. Her parents were more rigid than usual, and the conversation soon turned to the subject they both wanted to address. "Mariana, we need to talk about this, young man," Roberto began, choosing his words carefully. "Lucas?" Mariana replied, knowing exactly where this was headed. "Yes, Lucas. He may be a decent person, But you have to understand he doesn't belong in our world, Helena continued. Don't you think you're confusing admiration with something more? Mariana looked at her parents, trying to contain her irritation. What do you know about our world? About my world? Lucas is one of the most incredible people I've ever met. He has more character and honesty than half the people you surround yourselves with. This is immaturity, Mariana. Roberto raised his voice. A relationship like this will never work. You come from different worlds. Love doesn't pay the bills or build a life. Maybe in your world, love means nothing. But in mine, it means everything, Mariana replied, rising from the table. The conversation ended in a heated argument, with Mariana defending her relationship and her parents insisting she was making a mistake. But no matter how hard they tried to impose their will, Mariana was determined to follow her heart. For the first time in her life, she wasn't willing to bow to her family's pressure. Lucas, meanwhile, began to feel the weight of their class difference. His friends in the community made jokes, suggesting he was in it for the money. During his outings with Mariana, he noticed judgmental stares from people around them. It started to chip away at his self-esteem. Mariana, sometimes I think you deserve better, someone who fits better with you, he said one day as they walked through the park. Mariana stopped and took his hands. Lucas, you're everything I want. I don't care what others say. I just need to know if you're willing to face this with me. Lucas hesitated, but looking into her eyes, he saw that her love was genuine. He nodded. I'm with you. Their relationship continued despite the resistance from Mariana's parents and the challenges they faced. Every obstacle only strengthened their bond. For them, love was stronger than any social barrier, even if the world around them insisted on proving otherwise. Helena was on the terrace of the mansion, holding a glass of wine, when Roberto entered with a heavy expression. They had discussed the issue in every way possible, but nothing seemed to change. Mariana's relationship with Lucas grew stronger every day, ignoring the boundaries they tried to impose. As a businessman, Roberto always believed problems could be solved with logic and strategy. To him, love was a matter of convenience and mutual interests, not an uncontrollable force. Helena, on the other hand, saw their daughter's relationship as a direct threat to the family's reputation. Both were resolute. They would do whatever it took to separate Mariana and Lucas. The next morning, Roberto called Mariana to his office for a conversation. The room was imposing, with shelves filled with books on law and economics, but the seriousness of the space didn't intimidate his daughter. She entered with the confidence of someone ready to face yet another manipulation attempt. Mariana, we need to talk about the future, Roberto began, flipping through a report on his desk. You're young, and like anyone your age, you sometimes let your emotions guide you. Mariana crossed her arms, already anticipating his speech. I'm listening, Dad. Roberto sighed, trying to keep his impatience in check. Lucas is a good guy. No one here is saying otherwise. But what you have isn't sustainable. Love doesn't solve life's hardships. You come from different worlds with incompatible values and expectations. You need to think long-term. He placed the report on the desk and pushed it toward her. Mariana, without even glancing at the document, responded, I've heard this before. And I'll repeat myself, I love Lucas, and nothing you say will change that. Roberto realized rational arguments wouldn't be enough. Deciding to take a different approach, he began implementing practical measures to drive them apart. The first strategy was to cut off Mariana's financial access. Roberto and Helena believed that without the resources she was used to, she would realize how unsuitable Lucas was for her life. Mariana, however, accepted the change with a calmness that caught them off guard. She adjusted to living with the bare minimum and even found ways to save money, adapting her habits to fit her new reality. When Lucas learned of the situation, he offered to help. He had never been comfortable with her wealth and secretly felt this was a good opportunity to prove they could build something together without relying on anyone else. Because of this, their relationship grew even stronger. Mariana not only embraced Lucas's support but also became more involved in his daily life, gaining a deeper understanding of his reality. She started spending time at his home, helping with small repairs he did to support his family. It was a world completely different from her own, But instead of pushing her away, it only drew her closer. When the financial restriction failed to have any effect, Helena decided to take a more direct approach. She organized a series of dinners and social events with the aim of introducing Mariana to men she deemed more suitable. Promising lawyers, young entrepreneurs, heirs from influential families, Helena made sure to select only the best. Always polite, Mariana attended the events but made it clear through her demeanor and words that she had no interest in anyone other than Lucas. These encounters only served to highlight how special her relationship truly was. The suitors her parents selected seemed to follow a script: conversations about business, travel, and acquisitions. There was no room to discuss dreams or values. When Mariana compared these men to Lucas, who spoke passionately about his community, his work, and his family, she felt reassured that she had made the right choice. Helena and Roberto did not give up. They decided to change tactics once again, opting to plant doubts in Mariana's mind. Helena began subtly mentioning the difficulties of maintaining a relationship with someone from a different social class. She shared stories of couples who had failed, of hidden prejudices, and the limitations they would face. Mariana listened patiently but refused to let it affect her. Rather than feeding the doubts her parents tried to instill, she used them as motivation to strengthen her bond with Lucas. Whenever a challenge arose, the two leaned on each other, proving they could overcome anything together. Frustrated by the failure of their attempts, Helena and Roberto began to intensify the obstacles. Roberto used his influence to make opportunities harder for Lucas to come by. He made discreet calls to important contacts, subtly suggesting that associating with Lucas wouldn't be beneficial. Helena, on the other hand, tried to make Lucas feel inadequate, casting critical glances and making subtle remarks whenever he appeared at events for the social project. But Lucas wasn't easily intimidated. He faced every challenge with the same resilience that had helped him overcome so many adversities in life. For him, Mariana's love was more than enough to justify the effort. Moreover, Lucas knew that his dignity was something no one could take away. The tension reached its peak when Helena decided to confront Mariana more aggressively. One quiet afternoon, she entered her daughter's room unannounced, carrying a stack of papers. "You think you know Lucas, but you don't know everything about him," Helena said, throwing the papers onto the bed. Mariana glanced at the documents, recognizing them as a detailed report on Lucas's life. It contained information about his family, his financial situation, and even past struggles. "This is it?" Mariana asked in a controlled tone. "You investigated his life?" "I did what was necessary. I want you to see what's at stake." Mariana picked up the papers but didn't read them. Instead, she looked directly at her mother. "This only proves how little you understand what I feel for him. I don't care about his past, Mom. What matters is who he is today." Helena left the room, furious. For the first time, she realized there might be nothing she could do to change her daughter's heart. Mariana and Lucas's relationship continued to grow despite all the obstacles. For them, every challenge imposed by her parents only reinforced the strength of their love. The social class difference, which so many saw as an insurmountable divide, became a powerful bond that brought them closer together. While Roberto and Helena desperately tried to control their daughter's destiny, Mariana and Lucas proved every day that true love doesn't bow to pressure or barriers. Helena was in the living room, fine-tuning the details of the evening's dinner. The choice of dishes, the arrangement of flowers on the table, and even the background music had been meticulously planned. Nothing in the setting seemed out of place. But the dinner wasn't merely a family celebration, it was the opening move in a new game, a carefully calculated strategy to separate Mariana and Lucas. After weeks of direct confrontations, Helena and Roberto realized they needed to change tactics. Mariana's resistance had proven unshakable, and the direct clashes only strengthened her bond with Lucas. So, they decided to take a different approach. They would make it seem like they were willing to accept the relationship. Showing sympathy and receptiveness might, in their view, be the best way to expose the couple's vulnerabilities. Seated at the dinner table that evening were Roberto, Helena, Mariana, and Lucas. It was the first time Lucas had been invited to a formal event at Mariana's family home. He had spent the entire afternoon debating whether he should accept the invitation. Intuitively, he knew it wasn't just a gesture of goodwill. The luxurious environment and Helena and Roberto's overly friendly behavior stirred a suspicion he couldn't shake. Helena steered the conversation lightly, focusing on superficial topics and avoiding anything that might cause discomfort. She praised Lucas, mentioning how dedicated he seemed to his work and how his presence had positively influenced Mariana. Roberto, meanwhile, took a more reserved role, observing closely as though analyzing Lucas's every move. Sitting next to Lucas, Mariana seemed genuinely happy. To her, the dinner represented a significant shift. After so much confrontation, she believed her parents had finally understood that her relationship with Lucas wasn't a passing phase. Watching Helena smile at Lucas and listen to him talk about his experiences felt almost surreal, as if a new dynamic was forming. But Lucas wasn't so easily convinced. He noticed the fleeting glances exchanged between Helena and Roberto, the carefully timed pauses in their conversations, and the deliberate way each word was chosen. There was no sincerity in those interactions. Behind the smiles and friendly gestures, he sensed an underlying tension, as if something was being plotted. In the weeks that followed, Mariana's parents maintained their cordiality. They began inviting Lucas to more events, placing him in social situations alongside businessmen and friends from high society. It was an environment where he clearly felt out of place. Lucas noticed how conversations often revolved around topics he wasn't familiar with, like international investments, contemporary art, and luxurious travel. No matter how hard he tried to adapt, he felt like a stranger in that world. Helena always seemed ready to smooth over any awkwardness, offering compliments or changing the subject whenever Lucas hesitated. But behind this facade was a clear goal: to subtly show him that he didn't belong. It was a psychological game, full of small gestures and insinuations, designed to chip away at his confidence without Mariana noticing. Despite these manipulative attempts, Lucas stood his ground. He didn't argue or react to the veiled provocations. Instead, he observed everything with patience, mentally noting every detail. He knew Helena and Roberto hadn't truly changed, they had merely adjusted their strategy. Their kind and welcoming demeanor was a facade, and he was determined not to fall into their trap. Mariana, on the other hand, continued to believe in her parents' change of heart. She saw the invitations and compliments as proof that they were beginning to accept Lucas and value their relationship. She insisted that Lucas attend every event, believing it was important to strengthen the bond between him and her family. At one of Helena's organized events, Lucas's suspicions were confirmed. During a brief conversation with one of the guests, a close friend of Roberto, the man asked excessively detailed questions about his life. Something about the tone of the questions made Lucas uncomfortable. It felt as though they were fishing for information to use against him. Lucas responded politely but vaguely, leaving the conversation certain he needed to stay even more vigilant. As the days passed, Lucas began to notice other signs that he was being tested. Small comments from Helena, always subtle, seemed to question his ability to provide Mariana with the lifestyle she was accustomed to. Roberto, meanwhile, casually mentioned how difficult it was to maintain stability in a relationship when financial differences were so pronounced. Lucas didn't confront these remarks directly but remembered every word. He understood that their goal was to make him doubt himself, but he refused to let that happen. His confidence came from the genuine love he shared with Mariana, and that was stronger than any attempt at manipulation. The pinnacle of Helena and Roberto's strategy came when they suggested that Mariana and Lucas join them on a family trip. To Mariana, the idea sounded wonderful, an opportunity to strengthen the bond between Lucas and her parents. To Lucas, however, it felt like the ultimate test, a carefully orchestrated situation designed to put him at a disadvantage. During the trip, the interactions became even more intense. Helena made a point of highlighting the differences between Lucas's tastes and habits and those of the family. Roberto, meanwhile, subtly implied that Lucas was merely a temporary figure in Mariana's life. But Lucas, once again, held his composure. He knew that the only way to win this game was not to play. By the end of the trip, Helena and Roberto were frustrated. Despite their efforts, Lucas hadn't yielded to their provocations. He remained steadfast and unshaken, like a rock weathering a storm. Mariana, on the other hand, remained oblivious to their manipulations, believing her parents had finally accepted their relationship. Lucas knew Helena and Roberto's intentions went deeper than he could see. But instead of confronting them, he chose to focus on what truly mattered, his love for Mariana. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone except her. And that, he knew, was enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The preparation for the event began weeks in advance, with Helena and Roberto meticulously planning every detail. The gala dinner, which would gather the elite of high society, was intended to celebrate the family's legacy and reflect their influence in the business world. For the two of them, however, the night also served a broader purpose: to prove that Lucas didn't belong in their world. The invitation for Lucas to deliver a speech was carefully calculated. Helena presented the idea to Mariana as a gesture of inclusion, saying it would be a way to highlight Lucas's inspiring story and connect it to the values the family sought to represent. Mariana, thrilled, immediately agreed. To her, the invitation was yet another sign that her parents were finally accepting Lucas as part of her life. Lucas, however, felt an immediate sense of discomfort upon hearing the news. Though he didn't voice his doubts to Mariana, he knew the invitation wasn't as innocent as it seemed. From the beginning, Helena and Roberto had made their disapproval of the relationship clear, and Lucas suspected this so-called gesture of welcome concealed more complex intentions. Still, for Mariana's sake, he decided to accept. He didn't want to disappoint her, especially at such an important moment for her. On the day of the event, Mariana's parents' mansion was transformed into a scene worthy of a luxury magazine. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling of the grand hall, casting a hypnotic glow. Impeccably decorated tables filled the space, adorned with rare floral arrangements and gleaming silverware that seemed untouched. A soft orchestra played in the background, creating an atmosphere of sophistication that dazzled the guests. Lucas arrived at the event alongside Mariana, both impeccably dressed. She wore a navy blue evening gown that highlighted her natural elegance, while he opted for a simple yet well-tailored suit that, despite its modesty, accentuated his presence. As they entered, all eyes turned toward them. Mariana, accustomed to the attention, greeted the guests with warm smiles. Lucas, on the other hand, felt the weight of the evaluative gazes that scrutinized every detail of his appearance. Helena and Roberto greeted them with calculated smiles. Helena looked stunning in a red couture dress, while Roberto, with his commanding demeanor, seemed to effortlessly control the atmosphere. They exchanged cordial greetings with Lucas, offering compliments on his willingness to attend the event. "We're so glad you accepted our invitation to speak tonight," Helena said with rehearsed kindness. Lucas thanked her politely, though his discomfort was evident in his posture. He knew he wasn't just another guest. He felt like a participant in a spectacle he didn't fully understand. As the guests settled in, the party unfolded with the expected grandeur. Champagne flowed in crystal flutes, servers carried trays of delicacies, and lively conversations filled the hall. Mariana, beaming with pride, made a point of introducing Lucas to friends and acquaintances, praising his life story and dedication to community work. To her, Lucas's presence symbolized courage and a break from societal norms, filling her heart with pride. Lucas, however, felt out of place. The conversations around him revolved around topics far removed from his reality: foreign market investments, contemporary art exhibitions, and exotic vacation destinations. Though the guests treated him with politeness, he noticed subtle nuances in their gazes and tones. Some regarded him with curiosity, others with condescension, and few with genuine interest. As Lucas navigated the sea of superficiality, Helena watched from a distance, satisfied. To her, his discomfort was proof that her plan was working. The goal wasn't to humiliate him publicly but to sow doubt, to make Lucas realize that, no matter how hard he tried, he would never truly belong in that circle. When dinner was served, the atmosphere shifted to a more formal tone. In their opening speeches, Helena and Roberto spoke about the family's legacy and the values they claimed to represent. They emphasized perseverance, ethics, and hard work, though in a way that seemed to exclude anyone outside their privileged experiences. Lucas listened in silence, working hard to maintain a neutral expression. Mariana, sitting beside him, appeared captivated. To her, hearing her parents speak about values she also saw in Lucas was proof they were finally recognizing the man she loved. When the speeches ended, the guests applauded warmly. Helena then announced that a special guest would share his story that evening, Lucas. The announcement was met with polite applause, though some expressions in the crowd revealed surprise or even skepticism. Lucas felt his heart race. The moment he had dreaded had arrived. As the guests waited expectantly, he remained silent for a few seconds, scanning the room. The lights sparkled against the chandeliers and jewelry, but to him, it all felt distant and oppressive. The weight of the environment and the knowledge that Helena and Roberto likely hoped for his failure heightened his tension. Taking a deep breath, he stood up slowly. Every movement seemed to draw more attention, and the walk to the stage felt like crossing a minefield. Yet he kept his head held high, determined to face the challenge. After all, he was there for Mariana and, above all, for what they represented together. As he reached the stage, Lucas faced the audience. He knew this wasn't just a speech, it was a test. And no matter who was there to judge him, he reminded himself that the only person he needed to prove himself to was the woman who loved him. The atmosphere in the room was charged with anticipation as Helena called Lucas to the stage. The golden glow from the chandeliers illuminated the critical eyes of an audience that seemed to judge every detail of the moment before it even began. Lucas's name echoed through the microphone, and the applause that followed was polite but lukewarm. It was impossible to ignore the whispers at some tables, accompanied by curious or even condescending glances. Sitting beside Mariana, Lucas felt his entire body tense. He had been uncomfortable since the evening began, but now, as he prepared to step onto the stage, the weight of the situation felt almost unbearable. It wasn't just the pressure of speaking to a crowd so different from those he was used to. It was the sense of being scrutinized, not for his words but for what he represented. Mariana noticed his stiffness and clasped his hand firmly. Her eyes radiated unconditional support, though they also carried a hint of worry. "You're going to do great," she whispered with a smile that tried to mask her own apprehension. Before Lucas could respond, Helena leaned in discreetly toward them. "Relax, Lucas. This is an opportunity to show how inspiring you are. I'm sure it will be an unforgettable moment for all of us." There was something in her tone that didn't sound genuine, but Lucas didn't have time to dwell on it. Across the table, Roberto added a supportive nod. "Remember, we're all here to celebrate you. Go and show us what you're capable of." Lucas knew that wasn't true. He didn't feel like he was there to be celebrated, he felt like he was being tested. Even so, he took a deep breath and stood, knowing that refusing the invitation would only increase Mariana's discomfort and fuel Helena and Roberto's arguments against him. As he walked toward the stage, the sound of his footsteps seemed amplified. The constant murmuring of the audience became an unsettling backdrop. Some stares were overtly hostile, others, veiled behind thin smiles, were even sharper. He caught muffled laughter from one of the nearby tables, though he couldn't pinpoint its source. The words were indistinct, but the mocking tone was clear. From her seat, Mariana watched everything closely. She noticed the judgmental expressions and the subtle exchanges of glances between the guests. A pang of discomfort crossed her chest, but she tried to push it aside. Her parents had assured her that the invitation was a gesture of acceptance, and Mariana wanted to believe that. However, the atmosphere seemed to contradict that idea. The guests, who had been engrossed in superficial conversations moments before, now focused intently on Lucas in a way that felt almost cruel. Mariana glanced at her parents, searching for some explanation. "Don't worry, dear," Helena said, noticing her unease. "He's just nervous. It's normal. Once he starts speaking, everyone will admire his story." Roberto nodded with a faint smile. "A bit of tension is inevitable, but I'm sure he'll surprise us in a positive way." Their words sounded reassuring, but Mariana sensed a strange dissonance. Something about her parents' posture, the way they watched Lucas ascend the stage, didn't seem as welcoming as they tried to portray. When Lucas reached the stage, the tension in the room was palpable. He climbed the steps with steady strides, but he felt the weight of every gaze upon him. At the center of the stage, he paused for a moment, letting himself take in the atmosphere before facing the microphone. The tables closest to the stage were the hardest to look at. Lucas noticed the gleam of false smiles and disdainful glances barely hidden behind a facade of civility. At one table, a group of sharply dressed men whispered among themselves, casting direct looks at Lucas. One of them let out a low chuckle, quickly stifled when he noticed Lucas watching them. Further back, a woman adjusted her pearl necklace while murmuring something to the friend beside her, who nodded with a critical look. Small gestures and subtle expressions revealed what Lucas already feared. No matter what he said, many in that room had already made up their minds about him. Meanwhile, Mariana observed everything from her seat, feeling her discomfort grow. She couldn't ignore the muffled laughter and whispered comments around her. No matter how much she tried to convince herself that she was overreacting, she couldn't deny what was unfolding before her eyes. Even so, she kept her gaze fixed on Lucas, willing her strength toward him. Helena and Roberto, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. Helena, with a faint smile, kept her eyes on the stage, but her expression was more analytical than supportive. Roberto, arms crossed, watched Lucas as if assessing the performance of a subordinate in a business meeting. Lucas stood in silence for a few moments, adjusting the microphone. He knew his hesitation would be seen as weakness, but he needed that moment to regain control of his thoughts. Outwardly, he appeared composed, but inside, the pressure was mounting. It wasn't just the weight of Mariana's expectations, it was the awareness that the entire room seemed against him. Looking out at the audience, Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. It was as if he were standing there, exposed, not to be heard but to be scrutinized, an outsider in a space meticulously designed to exclude him. He understood that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about what he represented, someone trying to belong in a world where many believed he didn't have the right. The silence in the hall was absolute. The orchestra, which had provided soft background music throughout dinner, had gone quiet. Only the faint clinking of silverware being cleared by staff in the back broke the tension. Mariana held her breath. For the first time that night, the unwavering confidence she'd had in her parents' gesture wavered. As Lucas stood motionless on the stage, she realized something was deeply wrong. But before she could react, Lucas took a step forward, ready to speak. The moment he had feared the most had arrived. The hall remained silent as Lucas, breathing deeply, approached the microphone. The tension in the room felt heavy, but he held himself steady. Looking out at the faces in the audience, he saw expressions that ranged from curiosity to disdain, with a thin layer of skepticism threading through it all. He knew that many in the room had already decided what to think of him before he even opened his mouth. Calmly, Lucas adjusted the microphone. The sound of his breathing briefly echoed through the speakers, and he realized there was no escape. This was the moment he had feared, but it was also his chance to show who he truly was. Closing his eyes for a brief second, Lucas let the words flow from his heart. "Good evening, everyone." His voice came out steady, though nervousness still tightened his chest. "First and foremost, I want to thank Mariana's family for inviting me to be here tonight. It's an honor to be part of such a special event." He paused, observing the initial reactions. Most people kept neutral expressions, while a few whispered discreetly. Lucas decided to press on, ignoring the signs of disinterest or judgment. "I grew up in a place very different from this one. My earliest memories are of a small house with walls that seemed more fragile than they really were. That's where I lived with my parents and 2 younger siblings. My father was a construction worker, my mother a seamstress. They didn't have much, but they always did their best to give us what they could." He smiled at the memory. "We were happy despite the struggles." A few members of the audience shifted in their seats, showing the first signs of interest. Others remained expressionless, as if waiting for his story to confirm preconceived stereotypes. "When I was 9, my father had an accident at work. He fell from scaffolding that didn't meet safety standards. It was the day our lives changed forever. He didn't survive the accident, and suddenly, my mother was left alone, trying to support 3 young children." Lucas paused for a moment, feeling the weight of the emotions. From her table, Mariana clasped her hands tightly, her eyes fixed on him. She knew how painful those memories were for Lucas, but she also understood that sharing them was his way of revealing his essence. My mother did what she could, but the challenges were immense. By the time I was 12, I started working. I sold fruit on the street, washed cars, whatever I could do to help at home. It wasn't easy, but it was during that time that I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. Dignity doesn't depend on how much money you have, but on how you choose to face the situations life throws at you. Some faces in the audience began to soften. Lucas's calm, steady tone and the sincerity of his words seemed to reach those willing to listen. When I was 15, my mother fell ill. Cancer. We did everything we could to treat her, but the diagnosis came too late. Losing her was the hardest moment of my life. I was left alone with my brothers, who were still very young. Even in her final days, my mother kept repeating one thing: never give up. Work hard, but never sacrifice your integrity. Lucas took a deep breath, gripping the microphone stand tighter. Those words echoed in his memory, guiding him to this day. After she passed, I had to leave school and take full responsibility for our home. I worked as a construction helper, a mechanic, whatever jobs I could find. For years, the only thing that mattered to me was ensuring my brothers had a chance at a better life. And thanks to a lot of hard work, they succeeded. Today, one of them is a teacher, and the other is studying engineering. By now, several faces in the audience had softened. Lucas's authenticity and sincerity were beginning to break through the barriers that appearances and social standing had built. I was often told that the world wouldn't be fair to someone like me. That, because of where I came from, I'd have to accept less than I deserved. But my mother taught me never to lower my head, even when the odds were stacked against me. And it's with that lesson that I've faced every challenge. He glanced at Mariana, who was smiling with pride, and felt a wave of strength. She was the reason he was standing there, and nothing was more important than showing her, and everyone else, that he wasn't ashamed of who he was. Meeting Mariana was a gift I never imagined receiving. She saw something in me that many others overlook. It wasn't my story or my hardships that drew her to me, but the person I chose to be despite them. And for that, I am eternally grateful. When he mentioned Mariana's name, he noticed some people in the audience glance at her. For the first time, their expressions weren't filled with judgment but with a mix of surprise and respect. Lucas paused again, collecting his thoughts before concluding. I'm here tonight not because I want to prove anything to you, but because I believe that stories like mine, no matter how simple they may seem, have something to teach. We all face difficulties, no matter where we come from. But what truly defines us are the choices we make. And I have always chosen to be guided by dignity, respect, and love. The hall, which had previously felt cold and distant, was now enveloped in a reflective silence. Even those who had started the evening with critical gazes now seemed to be absorbing Lucas's words. Without raising his voice or trying to impress, he had captured the essence of who he was. A simple but honorable man whose story was marked by resilience, not weakness. Holding the microphone in his hands, Lucas gave the audience one last look. He knew he had touched some hearts, but he also knew that, for others, he would remain the man who doesn't belong here. Still, that didn't matter. He had spoken his truth, and that was enough. When Lucas finished his last sentence, the silence that filled the hall was almost tangible. The echo of his words seemed to linger in the air, as if no one quite knew how to react. Even the whispers and muffled laughter from earlier in the evening had disappeared, replaced by a heavy, contemplative stillness. To Lucas, that silence was more meaningful than any immediate applause. He had spoken from the heart, and now the response was out of his control. He paused, letting the audience absorb his words. As he looked out, he noticed something surprising. Faces that had once been hardened with indifference or disdain now seemed different. Some eyes glistened with restrained tears, while others showed expressions of guilt or regret. It was as if the invisible walls of prejudice had started to crumble. Standing tall, Lucas took a deep breath and continued. Too often, people judge us by what we have or by how we appear. But what truly matters isn't what's on the surface. What defines a person is their ability to face challenges, to love despite hardships, and to see value where others only see weakness. His voice, which had carried a tone of firmness earlier, was now softer, almost comforting. He looked at the guests, trying to connect with each person in the room. Some avoided his gaze, clearly uncomfortable, while others met his eyes, now with a respect that hadn't been there before. Mariana sat at the table, unable to hold back her tears. Watching Lucas stand there, sharing his most painful memories with a crowd that had initially dismissed him, filled her with a pride she could barely describe. He wasn't just confronting prejudice. He was transforming the atmosphere with the truth of his story. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the napkin in her lap, trying to control the overwhelming emotion threatening to consume her. She glanced at her parents, searching for a reaction. Helena's face was serious, carefully neutral, but there was something in her eyes that betrayed her. It was the look of someone seeing themselves in a mirror for the first time and disliking what they saw. Roberto, seated beside her, was restless, fiddling with the cuffs of his shirt as if adjusting the fabric could distract him from his growing discomfort. Both tried to mask their embarrassment, but it was impossible to ignore the shift in the room. Their plan to use the speech as a trap had backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating Lucas, they had given him a platform to showcase his strength and dignity, casting their own values in an unflattering light. As Lucas continued to speak, something extraordinary happened. A woman seated in the front row, impeccably dressed, discreetly wiped away a tear. Her gesture was followed by another guest, and then another. Soon, the entire room seemed overtaken by an emotion no one could suppress. Lucas's words touched something deep, something that transcended social class and status. He spoke of loss, sacrifice, and universal values that many in the room may have forgotten. For those who considered themselves above it all, his story was a painful reminder that true greatness doesn't come from material possessions but from character. Lucas glanced at Mariana, who was now openly crying, no longer trying to hide her emotions. Her gaze encouraged him to continue, to finish what he had started. No matter how many times life tries to knock us down, what truly matters is how we choose to rise. That's what brought me here today. And that's what makes me believe that, no matter where I come from or where I stand, I can build something meaningful. Because, in the end, what defines us is not what we own, but what we leave behind in the world. As he concluded, Lucas paused, letting his words settle in the hearts and minds of those listening. He stepped back from the microphone, allowing the room to breathe in silence once more. The applause began tentatively, as if the guests were still processing the weight of what they had heard. But it soon swelled in intensity, until the entire room was on its feet, clapping fervently. Many were now openly crying, unable to hold back their emotions. Those who had judged him earlier now recognized the greatness in his humility. Lucas, still on the stage, remained composed. He didn't smile or revel in the reaction. Instead, he gave a slight nod as if to thank them, but also to make it clear that his intent had never been to impress. He had spoken from the heart, and that was all that mattered. Mariana rose from her seat and walked to the stage, unfazed by the eyes that followed her. When she reached Lucas, she embraced him tightly, letting her tears flow freely. To her, this moment was definitive proof that he was the right man for her, regardless of everything that had been done to try to separate them. Helena and Roberto remained seated, unable to join in the overwhelming emotion. As applause erupted around them, they sat frozen, their expressions a mix of forced pride and shame. The carefully laid plan they had devised had crumbled before their eyes, exposing not only Lucas's strength but also the shallowness of their own intentions. The impact of Lucas's speech didn't end with that moment. He had planted a seed in the minds of many in the room. His story, his courage, and his authenticity would continue to resonate, challenging prejudices and prompting reflections no one had anticipated that evening. For Lucas, the audience's emotional reaction was a victory, not over Mariana's parents or the guests, but over his own fears and the burden of carrying a story he once believed wasn't worth sharing. In that moment, he realized he didn't just belong in Mariana's world. He had the power to inspire it. As the applause slowly faded and the guests began to shift their attention, Lucas stepped off the stage with steady steps, still feeling the emotional weight of what he had just experienced. The audience's response had caught him off guard. He hadn't expected tears, let alone a standing ovation. To him, the words he had spoken were simply the truth of his life, and it felt strange to see how deeply they had moved so many people. As Lucas approached Mariana, he was immediately pulled into a warm embrace. She was glowing, her eyes still glistening with tears, and her smile carried genuine pride. He didn't need words to understand what it meant to her. He held her for a moment, feeling the relief of having overcome the most challenging part of the evening. As the two embraced, some guests began to approach to congratulate him. Elegantly dressed men and women extended their hands, many still teary-eyed, praising his courage and authenticity. Lucas, ever humble, thanked them with a modest smile, refusing to be swept up in the emotion. He knew the true impact of his words wasn't in the compliments but in the changes they might spark in the hearts of those who had heard him. Across the room, a man watched the scene with keen interest. He was tall, with well-kept gray hair and an imposing posture, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that spoke to his high standing in society. His name was Antonio Noguera, an influential businessman known for his innovative vision and ability to spot talent where others saw none. At that moment, however, Antonio wasn't thinking about business. He was deeply moved by Lucas's story. Lucas's words had stirred something in him, a distant memory of his own youth when he had faced similar hardships before building his empire. Antonio felt an immediate connection with the young man, a mix of admiration and respect that drove him to make an impulsive but deeply aligned decision. He waited patiently while Lucas received congratulations from other guests. When the opportunity finally arose, Antonio approached with confident steps, his expression a blend of seriousness and kindness. "Lucas, right?" Antonio said, extending his hand. Lucas turned, slightly surprised by the approach, but he accepted the firm handshake. "Yes, that's me," he replied in his usual unassuming way. "My name is Antonio Noguera," he continued. "I was in the audience tonight and listened to every word of your speech. I have to say, it was one of the most inspiring things I've ever witnessed at an event like this." Lucas, though touched by the compliment, wasn't sure how to respond. He simply nodded his thanks, but Antonio seemed determined to go further. "Your story reminded me a lot of my own journey. I, too, started with very little and had to fight for every opportunity. It's rare to find someone with your determination and ethics these days. And to be honest, I think the business world needs people like you." Lucas frowned slightly, intrigued by the comment. Sensing his hesitation, Antonio smiled, a smile that combined confidence with empathy. "I'm the founder of a company called Noguera Group. We work in infrastructure and community development, something I believe aligns closely with the values you mentioned in your speech." He paused, gauging Lucas's reaction before continuing. "I'd like to invite you to work with us." Antonio's words hung in the air for a moment, and Lucas took a few seconds to process them. He wasn't used to receiving offers like this, let alone from someone so influential. He glanced at Mariana, who was watching the interaction with a mix of surprise and excitement, before turning back to Antonio. "I don't know what to say," Lucas began hesitantly. "I've never worked on something that big before." "That's exactly why I want you on my team," Antonio replied confidently. "You have something many seasoned professionals lack: resilience, authenticity, and the ability to see the world from a unique perspective. That's more valuable than any degree or resume." Lucas felt a lump in his throat. Antonio's words deeply moved him but also left him apprehensive. He knew that accepting this offer would mean stepping into a completely new world, full of challenges and responsibilities he had never faced before. "Take your time. There's no need to decide right now," Antonio said, sensing his hesitation. "But if you accept, I want you to know that I'll be by your side, guiding you every step of the way." With one last handshake, Antonio handed Lucas a business card and took his leave. Mariana, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, finally stepped closer, holding Lucas's hand firmly. "That was incredible," she said, her smile lighting up the entire room. "He sees in you what I've always known. Your potential is limitless." Lucas looked down at the card in his hand, still a bit stunned by the offer. He knew that accepting it would mean more than just starting a new job. It would mark the beginning of a profound transformation in his life, a chance to prove to himself and the world that he could overcome any obstacle. As daunting as it seemed, Lucas felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this night, which had begun with so much discomfort and anxiety, was actually the starting point of something much greater. And as he held Mariana's hand, he realized that with her by his side, he could face whatever the future had in store. The beginning of Lucas's new chapter was challenging. When he accepted Antonio Noguera's offer, he knew he was stepping into a world completely different from the one he knew. The corporate environment was sophisticated, competitive, and, in many ways, intimidating. But with his unshakable determination, Lucas dove in headfirst, eager to learn and grow. On his first day at the Noguera Group, Lucas felt the weight of the expectations placed upon him. While Antonio had assured him of his support, Lucas knew he would have to prove his worth to everyone else. Initially, he faced skeptical looks and veiled comments. Some colleagues saw him as Antonio's experiment, someone without traditional qualifications who might not measure up. But Lucas, accustomed to challenges, confronted these perceptions in the only way he knew, with hard work, honesty, and dedication. Over the months, Lucas stood out in surprising ways. He brought a unique perspective to the Noguera Group, shaped by his life experiences and the hardships he had overcome. When the company began developing projects in underserved communities, Lucas became the bridge between the executives and the people they aimed to help. His ability to genuinely connect with communities, combined with his unwavering ethics, became an invaluable asset to the company. Antonio, who had always believed in Lucas's potential, watched with pride as the young man grew. In meetings, Lucas demonstrated not only competence but also an empathy that inspired those around him. It didn't take long for him to rise through the ranks, taking on more significant responsibilities. His colleagues, once skeptical, now respected him deeply. As Lucas's professional life thrived, his relationship with Mariana blossomed. United by love and the challenges they had faced together, the two decided to make their commitment official. The wedding was an intimate ceremony filled with meaning. Unlike the grand events orchestrated by Helena and Roberto, the celebration was simple but deeply emotional. Close friends, colleagues, and people from the community where Lucas had grown up attended, sharing in the special moment. Helena and Roberto, though initially reluctant, were also present. Over time, as they witnessed Lucas's growth, they were forced to confront their prejudices. Seeing their son-in-law not only succeed but also transform the lives of others made them recognize the value of his integrity and character. Though they never openly admitted it, both began to respect him, learning that a person's true worth lies not in their background but in their actions. After the wedding, Lucas continued his upward trajectory. Within a few years, he became one of the top executives at the Noguera Group, leading initiatives that combined innovation with social impact. His balanced approach, blending technical expertise with a deep sense of humanity, made him a role model both inside and outside the company. Despite his success, Lucas never forgot his roots. He frequently visited the community where he had grown up, supporting local projects and encouraging young people to believe in their dreams. He understood that his story was an inspiration to many and made it a priority to use his position to create opportunities for those who, like him, had started with little. A defining moment came when Lucas was invited to a corporate event where he was honored as one of the most influential leaders in his field. The luxurious hall, reminiscent of the one where he had faced his first major test, was filled with prominent figures from the business and political worlds. During his acceptance speech, Lucas reflected on his journey. "For me, success has never been about wealth or status. It has always been about how we use our achievements to make a difference in the lives of others. I started with very little, but I was fortunate to meet people who believed in me. And that's what I strive to do every day, believe in human potential, no matter where it comes from." The room erupted in applause. Mariana, seated in the front row, watched proudly as the man she loved spoke. He had overcome every barrier, but most importantly, he had stayed true to himself. In the years that followed, Lucas and Mariana built a life marked not only by success but also by personal fulfillment. They had 2 children, whom they raised with the same values that guided their own lives: humility, respect, and empathy. Helena and Roberto, now devoted grandparents, became active participants in the family's life, leaving behind the prejudice that had once consumed them. Lucas continued to excel in his career but never lost sight of what truly mattered. He used his position to drive meaningful change, both in the business world and in the communities that had always been a part of his life. The story of Lucas and Mariana became a symbol of resilience and character, a reminder that true success is not measured by material achievements but by how we choose to impact the world around us. For Lucas, the journey had been full of challenges, but it was also rich with lessons he would carry forever. At the end of a long workday, Lucas often looked at his family and everything he had built. He felt immense gratitude, not just for the opportunities that had come his way but also for the choices he had made and the values he had upheld. He knew his story was a powerful testament that, with resilience and integrity, any obstacle could be turned into a stepping stone to success. And so, Lucas completed a cycle that began in humility and hardship but flourished into accomplishment and love. His life with Mariana was living proof that the true meaning of success lies in who we become along the way. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content. There are more amazing stories waiting for you. Click here and keep watching.